All right, everyone. Well, welcome to Table for Two's panel discussion. Today, we have three very, very exciting game designers, also avid players, and they're in the community. And I'm really excited to hear their thoughts on what they're up to and just kind of see how the discussion unfolds. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. So I'm going to go in clockwise on how I see you guys on the screen. Maybe just a brief background of yourself and your gaming experience and what you're up to. Maybe we'll just keep it really short. Ronald, would you like to start?
So I'm Ronald Melencio. I've been playing games when I was really young. I had started designing a couple years back, and so I really wanted to kind of see what it's like to get a game out to the market. I've been working on a few projects right now, and have been gone through the process of pitching it to publishers. So I'm not going the self-publish route, and I really hope to have my first game signed within a year. So great to be here. Thanks.
So my name is Trevor Kerth, game player and game designer. I started designing games as a 30-day challenge. I gave myself 30 days to see if I could build a game. And at the end of those 30 days, I had a game that was really terrible. Dusted it off a couple months later and started working on it again. And it's at a point now where it's playing well. It's just about finished with its design. And so I'm starting to move more into this manufacturing business development side of it. I am hoping to do the Kickstarter approach and do the self-publish route. So aiming to do the Kickstarter in about March, April of next year.
Beautiful. Thank you. David?
Yeah. So I have been playing games for many decades now, and actually kind of doing hobby game design for a very long time. I think I designed my first board game when I was like 12 or something. And I kind of recently decided that I was going to take all of these little half-finished projects and take one of them and do something with it. So I'm currently in the process of taking one of them, Galactic Alliance, and polishing it up, and going to be like Ronald, seeing about getting it pitched out to publishers. And my goal is similarly to try and get it, signed and moving in public's direction within about a year or so.
Beautiful. Well, I'm just going to jump right into it. And since you all mentioned your kind of publishing styles, I was curious how you guys came to those decisions, because obviously there's a couple different avenues to take, and either you're experiencing it right now or you've made a decision. And I'm sure you've seen people in your ecosystems or your friend groups take one route or the other, or maybe somehow a different mix. I'll open it up to all of you and just kind of how you came to your choices on how you're going to publish it or have it go to market, and maybe your experiences.
Sure, I'll start. My reasoning is very simple. My primary motivation for this is to see my game get out into the world and have people play it. So I am less concerned about making money off of it, because it's hard to make a lot of money off of board games anyway. And I'm okay giving up a little bit of creative freedom on it in exchange for not having to do a whole ton of the back end work that I'm not that interested in. Hence the publisher route.
Yeah, that's a good summarization of it. Yeah, essentially those three items that David had mentioned is the ones I was going to target as well. I think people think about really the kind of control they get from releasing a game, and we're talking about like artwork, marketing, positioning, and though that's one major factor. Major second one is also just kind of like that share of profits. I mean, there's a whole calculator that people have, but I think the rough estimate is you take 5 to 10% of what the publisher makes. But keep in mind, there are various folks in the value chain. And we could share that calculator in another topic. And then lastly, it's really the business part of it. I know lots of publishers who say that they don't design anymore because they're too busy figuring out the business side of it. And so it's really how much you want to allocate your time to this space.
Definitely. And I think I'm kind of the outlier here where I am all gung ho on the Kickstarter route, hoping to publish this myself under my own publishing company. Sort of my approach is that I like solving puzzles, and I like the game development and design as one of the puzzles. And then I like the puzzle of figuring out manufacturing. And then I like the puzzle of figuring out marketing. So altogether, it's just one big sort of hobby in a sense of kind of developing it beyond just the game itself. As far as profits go, I can't agree more with David. There's not much money to be made in launching your first game yourself. So not looking to become self-sufficient off this one. But the hope here is that it kind of turns into a pipeline. So more games can come through it. People in the board game developer communities can kind of take advantage of the pathway that I've created. And the goal would be to be able to move some of these games through it and kind of combine efforts to get our games out there together.
Love it. I was also thinking that all three of you are just, I would call you guys artists. I don't know if that's fair to say, but just the amount of creativity that has to go into it, from having just nothing to creating a game. So I was actually, even if we could take one step back, how do you go from even visualizing a concept for a game? Like, do you guys already have these thoughts kind of in your mind, or do you get inspiration from somewhere?
I have a spreadsheet that probably has about 30 board game ideas on it in various states. And a lot of it for me comes from when I play other games, those spark inspiration. And sometimes it's a game mechanic, or sometimes it's a different idea, like a theme. Like I could be reading a book and get an interesting idea out of that. And be like, oh, I wonder if I could make a board game out of, this idea. Um, in the case of my current one, it was a mechanical bit where I actually looked and said, so mine is a deck building game where you're adding cards to them as you go through the game. And my driving focus was all of the other deck builders I had ever played. You started with a set of cards that were terrible. And one of the major strategies in most of those games is, how do I get rid of these terrible cards as soon as possible? And for this game, one of my goals was to have the starter deck not be terrible, to have you want to see those cards pop up throughout the entire game. And I kind of went from there and figured out how would I do that and how would I make this work. And later on came, theme and presentation and all of those other aspects.
Was that similar to you guys? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, and professionally, outside of gaming, game design, I don't come from like a creative background, and so but I do probably compare it to maybe like a writer or like a music artist or a visual type artist. I think people find their own way of inspiration. Like for example, for me, like a lot of my inspiration is really just when something does pop in my head. Like for example, I used to have two dogs, and one dog I noticed would always pee over the other dog. And at one point I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, and then it's like, oh, that kind of reminds me of like, is there like some kind of like competition between them? And then I started thinking area control. And then I started thinking of like, dogs, a mechanic of like, layering. And that's how I started working on a game called Alpha, which is premised on like dog markings around it, around walking around a neighborhood. And then, or like I came across in a German expression called Schadenfreude. It's actually German for the pleasure in other people's kind of misfortune. And I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. And then I was thinking like, oh, imagine like the shared experience of us all talking about like our own unfortunate situations. And then I pretty much made a game out of that. So I think a lot of it is just driven, at least for me, just kind of, the interest and kind of like that passion of making games, which I think is probably one of the great things you see in a creative art. Like there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of excitement.
Love it.
For myself, like I mentioned earlier, I started this as kind of just a 30-day challenge for myself. So I started with the approach of actually just taking two games and seeing if I could smash them together. So it started as rock, paper, scissors meets tic-tac-toe. that was my inspiration. That's how I started. Smashed them together, and that kind of turned into area control with more elements in there. It turned into sort of a fire, grass, water system, and then it turned into drafting more cards. So my approach was a bit of just seeing what was around me and just smashing two things together, and then just spending a lot of time at the kitchen table with that concept, seeing if there was anything more that could be there. From there, I took a bit more of a practical approach and more of a research-driven approach, where I started playing, all the modern board games and started recording what elements of those games did I find satisfying. What was it about Wingspan? What was it about Cascadia? Any of these games that made me feel like, oh, I want to go back and play that again. And actually, I found three things that I thought were really interesting across all the games that I was playing that I really liked. They all had some kind of meaningful luck. So more than just, Yahtzee, where you're rolling dice and seeing what came up. There was some kind of luck that you could control. There were multiple strategies to win, so you didn't have to do the same thing over and over. And by the end of the game, you felt stronger than you were at the beginning of the game. So those were kind of the three elements that I found that I really liked in modern board games. So I took my rock, paper, scissors crossover, continued to develop it, and now it's a game that I'm going to be releasing called Demigods. That's kind of a cross between the action builder of Wingspan and the area control of Small World. So taking the two core elements of that, putting it together into a game that's much less heavy than those games, plays in about 30 minutes. But my development process was very sort of start with something and just see if it turns into anything else.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't come from a creative background, but I noticed there's a lot of parallels in just in like entertainment, like movie, television, etc. Like when people ask you like what your favorite game is, sometimes I almost think it's almost asking like what's your favorite movie or what's your favorite TV show, which some people may have, but at the same time it's almost like, well, what are you in the mood for? Maybe you're in the mood for like a light, because after a long day at work you're in the mood for something kind of funny and light, or maybe over the weekend you have a little bit more, I don't know, resources, so maybe you're okay with like a heavier documentary. And then some people enjoy kind of like quick shorts that are no longer than like 5-10 minutes. And so it's funny because as you delve into game design and just look at the breadth of games, you do see there isn't really just one. There's one that's intended campaign style where you go hours on end, or there's like the quick 5-minute game that has a quick like resolution. But despite all that, like Trevor mentioned something which was interesting, because if anyone studies like movie or kind of like television, we talk about like a game, like an arc, like the introduction, conflict resolution, or something, like kind of the climax, right? There's all these kind of like components that make a show compelling. And I almost find that analogous to gaming itself when you talk about I mentioned earlier about this thing called the game arc, where kind of like what you're doing at the end just feels very different from the very beginning. So there's kind of like a stage evolution. There's also a sense of, like Trevor had mentioned, luck. Like there's all these kind of like game elements that people like. Some people don't like. And it's really just kind of like, looking at all these kinds of components and disciplines and making it into something that, at the end of the day, people say like, sure, I'll play that again. But it's really, there's so much behind that, but ultimately it's, do people enjoy it?
Ronald, the last thing you said there, which was, sure, I'll play that again. I think that's a great test to see how your play testing is going. So every time I play Demigods, that's the final question I ask them. So what is keeping you from wanting to play this again? Or would you like to play this again next week? It's sort of a question, because then that gets people thinking of what specifically did they not like about it? What actions did they like about it? And that's helpful for me to find sort of, you were talking about the game arc that you're going through. Originally, I found that my game just played too fast. People were feeling like they were excited about it, and then all of a sudden, boom, the game is over. So from asking that question, I found out that my arc needs to extend a little bit longer. People are in the middle of having fun. They've built up their team. They want to use all the things that they've gained from the game. and it was just ending too fast. So with some more tweaks and by probing that question of would you play it again was really helpful to kind of get insight into the actual playtesting and development of the game.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. It's definitely one that I've asked people when they've played my game. And I think keeping in mind what your intended game experience is kind of helps inform whether or not their answer of yes or no is meaningful. And I don't mean that in to dismiss anyone's do they like it or not, but if someone only wants to play a quick 30-minute lighthearted, party game, my game's not that. So if that's what they want to play and they say, nah, this isn't really my kind of game, that's different from someone saying, well, I normally like this type of game, but I didn't like this or that about your game. Like those are those cases where it's something I have to pay attention to that person's complaints. If someone's only complaint is, well, this makes me think too hard and I wanted to go play a party game like Apples to Apples, then okay, my game wasn't for you. That's fine. But there's nothing I need to change on my end.
Right. I agree. And if we ever do expand into like a more like playtest focused conversation, it's a really good thing to point out. Like I don't see it enough where playtesters or even game designers who are kind of facilitating it to really kind of identify what the experience they're going for. And sometimes maybe it's kind of an open slate and they just kind of want to see what sticks. But at the same time, as you really start honing in, your target audience for this specific game and the kind of experience, like, are you going for high stress, but enjoy to watch other people stress? Are you going for like the cozy style where we're just all kind of relaxed, drinking a cup of tea? And I think, to have that kind of anchor in your game design kind of really helps kind of develop it, and also kind of drives mechanics, also drives the interaction. And so kind of like what you're saying, David, about asking people, this is kind of what I'm getting. Like, did you get that? And if not, like, and if that's not your type, that's also okay. And I think it just sets expectations too. And really, when it comes to playtesting, you really want to get the most out of it. And, this is just one way of doing that.
I definitely agree. I think the other valuable question is, can you name 2 other games that you like playing? And if they say Cards Against Humanity and Apples to Apples, they're probably not your audience for building the new Terraforming Mars kind of game or these super heavy games.
And the other thing that I liked to ask for mine is, now that you've played it once, what would you do different the next time? And that, especially because my game requires a lot more like strategy and knowledge of it and stuff. And there's usually a lot more of that. Oh, well, we would do this or that differently and whatnot. But even for lighter games, I find that that's really helpful, because the last thing you want to hear is someone look at it and go, I already figured it all out. There's really nothing different to do.
Right. Yeah, I find giving like the pitch at the beginning, like, oh, this is going to be a 20-minute filler game in between like maybe your heavier games for about 25-30 minutes, and it's relaxing, kind of setting that in position so that when they play the game, they kind of know like what the intent is. And then second is also letting them know in the playtest what I'm looking to get, because I know most of the time people aren't getting art, maybe unless it's the end of the kind of the playtest, the end of the development part of the game. But most of the time it's not going to be art, it's not going to be graphic design, it's not going to be rules, rarely rules. But kind of keeping that focus also on what they want to test. Like, are you testing a mechanic? Are you testing this variable player power? Are you testing maybe the balance for this particular resource? That could help too. But most of the time when it is just kind of open, that's fine too. If it's like, yeah, just poke around, play around with it, try to break it, I mean, that's valid too. But it's also about setting that expectation of, well, how playtesters should approach your game.
Awesome. Excuse me. I actually had one question to that as we go, maybe zooming out. Do you guys have any advice for someone who would be looking to start their game? Because you're all kind of in the testing phase. You have it out, you have a concept, it's being worked. But I'm actually curious, because just human nature, a lot of people say they want to do stuff, but there's probably some kind of hump you got to get over, right? Because all 3 of you have taken action. It's out there. at least from my perspective, it feels like there's always that risk of people rejecting your creation. And I imagine it holds a lot of people back that have good ideas or want to test something. But I admire all of you for kind of putting your games and kind of selves in a way kind of out there to be, I don't want to say criticized, but you know what I mean? There is a certain thing that I feel like there's a certain level of courage or forwardness that you need to have. So I'm curious what had you guys kind of go over that hump, and if you had any advice for someone who maybe they're designing their game, but they haven't told anyone or they haven't started.
I would say playtest the heck out of it and get other people to playtest the heck out of it. And that is, in fact, probably the hump. And that's actually my biggest problem. I mentioned before, I have this giant spreadsheet of stuff and they're in various different states. And the biggest problem with most of them is I haven't playtested them enough with other people. I haven't seen other people come in and do different things and try things that I've never thought of and interpret a rule in a way that I would not have thought of interpreting the rule. And all of those things you get when someone else sits down and tries to play your game. Because it's kind of like, it's one of those classic like business problems of I'm writing an email to someone and I know exactly what I mean. And I send the email off and then the other person is completely confused or goes in the wrong direction with it or thinks I said something else and I'm baffled as to why they would think that. Well, that's because I know what I mean. And the games are very similar. I know what the rules mean. I know how the mechanics are supposed to work. I know what something's supposed to do, but your players don't. And that's really important. And you have to play test a game many, 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 many times to get it to the point where it's actually polished and actually ready to get published. And that's a big hump because you can't do it all yourself. It doesn't matter if you want to devote 80 hours a week to working on your board game. You need other people, which means you need their time. And that's, a scarce resource. So you have to put yourself out there and find strangers willing to play your game and bribe your friends with pizza to play your game yet another time. And, whatever you need to do to actually get that level of feedback.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I'm sure David has come across it as well. But there's a point where every game developer believes that their game is 99% done, and they think that for about the next 10 iterations that they go over the game, they keep on thinking, well, there's no way someone could break this. There's no way it could go wrong. Then you take it out in the world, and someone comes up with something completely different that you had no way of anticipating. So I would give similar advice of start with yourself at the kitchen table, come up with a mechanic that's fun, and test it by yourself for a couple weeks, but as quickly as you can. There's lots of board game meetups, lots of people have similar interests. There's Discord, there's Tabletop Simulator, Tabletopia, lots of these different places. All those that I just mentioned are digital platforms for playtesting. Playtest some other people's games and have them playtest yours, but really a lot of it is just getting other people to have a different brain than yours, because every time I play it, it's 4 of the same brain playing against itself, and it's a tie almost every time. So it's not until you get out there with some other brains that you really see some differences. I would also add that starting out developing your board game is wildly intimidating. You see all these great games out there with beautiful art, elegant mechanics, really expressive rule books, and just very satisfying elements. I was sitting on this game for 3 months, sitting on Demigods, and it just wasn't fun to play. It just really wasn't fun. And I was having people play it, and I was getting feedback of just, I feel like we're just doing the same thing turn after turn after turn. But I needed to hear that. And every night I'd go home and I'd every night after playtesting, make little notes in my book and see if I could tackle what was wrong with it. And so I think it's very intimidating. So feel free to start small. The first thing I playtested literally was with some friends, and it was that tic-tac-toe meets rock, paper, scissors. And we just played around with that. And it's always interesting because no matter who it is, even my non-board game friends, they have interesting insight. So it's perfectly fine. They start saying, well, what if the board was bigger? What if there was a 4th symbol you could put out there? What if you could move symbols around all of a sudden? All these different things that really get that creativity flowing. So if you feel like you're stuck in a place and you're not moving forward with your game, just take it somewhere, go to meetup.com, find a board game group. And that's the way that I've seen it work really well so far.
But playtesting, absolutely agree. And playtesting, a whole host of things we could talk more about, from playtesting with just your group of friends, playtesting amongst yourself, playtesting with random strangers, and then telling those strangers it's not your game, you're actually doing it for a friend. Playtesting for sure, yeah. So agree with that. Trevor made a comment about kind of like what you see on the shelves, and I think it's helpful to realize that those games in the shelves started from really something totally different from what you see in the shelves. So I think like really internalizing that might help when people really think about just getting started, because you know the art you see, the UI, the mechanic, like it all evolved from kind of like the first iteration. And I know there aren't that many documentaries. There have been some growing, which I could probably share with Sean to share. You know, documentaries to see how a game is actually made. And you know, you'll realize that it came from just an idea and piece of paper, and you know, just a little bit of cut ups here and there. And you know, it kind of went from there with just constant improvement and iteration and testing, etc. The one thing I would add though to Trevor and David is, I think it's being okay that the game is broken too, because, and you know, you could debate like broken versus like a closed rule set, because I mean you could have a closed rule set and still broken, right? So those are kind of separate. But I think like just having like a version, like an iteration, which is can consist of like the concept, the rule set, you know, a win condition, a failure condition, you know, just kind of like all those elements, like just having that in a version, I think is worth kind of like as a starting point. And if it's not great, like if you think the win condition sucks, and if you feel like, you know, you could think of a better one, that's okay. I mean, you could still play test it, and you know, you could kind of bounce ideas from people and kind of iterate from there. So yeah, I think it's really just being comfortable just with things that just aren't working, and just open to ideas on how to make it better.
I've
I
also,
did want Oh, sorry.
we're all talking over each other, sorry. Um,
Yeah, go ahead, David. Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to add as a quick note onto the thing for your part of this is broken or there's something wrong with this. I was just going to say, and sometimes it's the best thing you can do is just set it aside for a bit and don't touch it. Come back in a couple of weeks or a couple of months later with a fresh pair of eyes, because oftentimes when you do that, suddenly you see things you can do different that solve those problems. Whereas if you're just beating your head against it day after day, you get stuck and it's hard to see past whatever, you know, the block is.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. That's one benefit of kind of taking on multiple projects. You know, different ideas, different audiences, and it kind of expands it a bit. So yeah.
The only other advice that I'd throw out there is there's kind of this adage of there's no perfect board game, there's only released board games. And within our group of board game developers, you know, we keep on telling each other we've paid far more money for far worse games than what we have right now. So it's perfectly fine. You're not creating your masterpiece, especially if it's your first game. That's perfectly fine. As long as people are leaving feeling like they had fun, and as long as you have fun, as long as you're enjoying your game, you're going to find other people that see your enjoyment in that game. And there's going to be other people that are going to enjoy it too. So keeping that mindset of perfection sort of out of your mind and looking at like, this needs to be fun for me. And there's a lot of games out there that aren't that good, but man, they make a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a good question. Essentially answering the question I was going to pose is for us to answer in this call is, when do we feel like our game is done? Which is kind of to that. I'll add that, I mean, the adage I hear from people is like, if you see it on the shelf and you're not going to cry, like, meaning like, you know, you're just happy, like in its state, right? Like you're not like disappointed. You're not like, you know, regretful of it. And I think a lot of it is just being happy with what you're going for and how it's achieved. I totally agree with Trevor's statement. I mean, it's true. Yeah. There's no such thing as like, finished games, right? For just published games, like that's the expression. So, It's really just finding out what it means for yourself. And I think for me, it's, I think a party game for 20, 25 minutes where we have a shared experience. Like I think like if I could get that, and you see that during the play testing and you see that going out there, like I think, if that was on the shelf today, yeah, I'd be happy with it. And, people pick it up. And it's to each their own. I know some people want like fantastic art. Maybe their goal is to have like miniatures. Maybe their goal is to, make a 100 plus game. There's various factors. And so I think it's kind of finding out what your motivation is and kind of sticking to that.
If you ever think your game isn't done, remember that they're on, I think, version 4 of Talisman now. So
Mm. It's very interesting that you guys kind of have this wisdom. It makes me think, is there like a game designer's like support group, or do you guys hang out amongst each other? Because there's that, at least from my view, there's that world of everyone's a player or a potential play tester, but this probably what you guys are all sharing, it seems a little bit maybe unrelatable to someone who hasn't been on the other side, right? So I'm curious how you guys, is this all, do you just learn it yourselves, or do you have a kind of a community that you talk with other designers, or?
a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Some of it's experience, some of it's I've, talked with other developers, done, some like meetup groups with the developers, and then like Board Game Geek has a whole like forum area dedicated to, board game design. And there's a bunch of really good advice and stuff on there. And when I started off, I went out and I just read all of these, threads on people of generic advice, but also just them like developing a very interesting game and me reading through all of that and going, oh, that's interesting. And then they'll share, lessons learned, or someone will give them a suggestion and I'll look at that and go, oh, that's a really good suggestion. I need to remember that.
I think my approach is kind of seeking what resources are out there, because I think they exist as long as you look for it. And if not, then you make the resource. So I know a lot, like what Dave was saying, BGG is a good resource. And then there's just a lot of like prolific designers who just share a lot of information online. Jamie Stegmaier is well touted as being very transparent in the publishing process and the design process, and really just contributing to the community and industry in that way. And then in terms of the industry itself, just going to conventions, networking, it's a really small world. You'd be surprised to see like kind of like how connected the gaming industry is. And then locally, you could look for meetup.com, Facebook groups. I kind of shuttle my time between San Diego and San Francisco, and so Golden Gate Game Makers, really big community up there in the Bay Area. And then Southern California, there wasn't much that I had seen as big, and so I started one called San Diego Game Designers and Playtesters. I think that's one, which is how I met Trevor and David. And it's really just kind of knowledge share and just try to learn best practices. And that's what I've also noticed, again, going to like something that's in a creative form. It's a very kind of like fluid, evolving type of art, just like anything else.
And I think that's the beauty of game design, is that it can really be anything. It can be very simple games, very complex games. And I do think there's an element of, if you're passionate about it and you're having fun doing it, and it's something that seems like a great hobby to you, then you're going to find the information that you're looking for, whether you go out and meet with people, or your Wednesday night board game group comes over and you tell them about what you're working on and they give you 15 minutes to try out something new. Online, Ronald's right, it's a small community, and I haven't met anyone who is closed off or reserved on helping out or giving information. I do feel like the board game industry doesn't have much of an attitude of, for me to succeed, others must fail. There's not very much of that. There's enough board games out there that we can all succeed together. So I don't see much of holding information or not being willing to answer an email, or if you've found someone that's a couple steps ahead of you, pinging them and just saying, hey, I love your game. How did you overcome this hurdle? That has worked super well, and just getting a quick response and a couple sentences of just, oh, these are the people I reached out to, or this is how I found this person. So I think that if you're looking for that community, finding someone who's 2 steps ahead of you and just asking how they did it is a great way of going about learning it.
Yeah, and on to that point of it, it's not a zero-sum game, right? You're not really competing. Someone pointed out, I don't remember who it was, that I think it was at like a panel at Comic-Con or something. But it just stuck with me, was this statement that board gamers will always be buying new games. So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter, even if Trevor and I were competing for a very similar idea, we had very similar games. If they're both really good games, people will buy both of them. They just might buy one before the other, and that's the only difference. So Trevor and I, currently we're not competing. Our board game designs are very different, but even if they were almost identical, as long as we make them both fun and give people a reason to play each of them, they'll buy each of them. It's fine. Not a problem.
And there's
Yeah.
really even so much positive collaboration that can happen there. If David's game is similar to mine, I can say, hey, if you like my game, check out David's.
Yeah.
The other really important advice, actually going back to your earlier question of what causes people not to actually design their board game, one of those things you see pop up online a lot as a question is, what if someone steals my idea? And one of the first things you need to get over is no one's going to steal your idea. Because first off, almost every board game designer has like dozens of ideas bouncing around the back of their head. They've got plenty to work with. And two, even if someone does take your idea, they'll go make a completely different game off of it. Right? We all look at something like deck builders. You look at Dominion, which was the first one to come out, and then it immediately spawned like dozens of other deck building games. And they're all different in some different ways, and they're all fun in their own different ways. And it doesn't matter that they're all inspired by Dominion. That doesn't diminish Dominion, and it doesn't diminish any of those others for being inspired by it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, and not that I'm a lawyer, but from what I understand from a legal perspective, like especially when it comes to like a creative art form, like think about like music, again, writing, like the way it's protected is very limited. I think the intuition behind that is, right, we want to encourage like the fostering of ideas and the iteration of ideas. And I think any designer would say that their idea was stemmed off of a previous game they played, heard of, thought of, or talked to someone about, which is in turn maybe from a different game. And so I think for that reason, I do agree. Like, I think we're probably net positive on that respect to say that, like, like my idea about, oh, dogs peeing on each other as a game, right? Like that concept in of itself isn't exactly like a protected idea. Then we could talk about the art and the language of the rule book.
Yeah, I mean, there's legal things that can be protected, like, writing can be copyrighted and things can be trademarked, but ideas?
Yeah.
Ideas can't. You can't trademark an idea at all. And it's counterproductive to get sucked into your idea being the important part. The important part is the execution. And honestly, I would be thrilled if my game got published and someone else was so inspired by it, they made a similar game.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the trends of campaign games, like the legacy games, how that kind of spawned like a new genre of games. And so that's, I mean, I think, again, I do think the industry is better off in that sense to allow that to happen. I did want to throw in when it came Sean's question about like resources and just kind of knowledge share. I think the best way is just playing games. So like, even if someone says, I don't design games, right? I haven't put pen to paper or something. Like, if people who, and I know people who play like a game once a week, once a night with their gaming group, and just thinking about the game, like what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought, seemed off, like just being mindful of kind of like a game, I think kind of already puts you there. Like, I think that's also like just a great way to just get into game design.
Love it. I was actually, another thing we were talking about that I actually kind of wanted to get into is, how do you physically create it, right? If there's a deck builder and there's board gaming, are you going to arts and crafts stores, or are there like templates or like kind of custom, not custom, but like the stock boards that you are filling in, or like same with cards that you just get a Sharpie and write on? Or I'm curious how you guys, cause having such different, physical games, how you manifested or created it in the real world.
For myself, it's Sharpie and a bunch of copy paper is step one. And I think probably everyone's on board with that. You can go to Amazon and buy, a bag of pieces. I don't know if they'll show up on camera, for a couple of bucks, or, salvage them out of one of your other board games. But there's so many opportunities just to Sharpie paper, and even just pennies. I started actually with a bunch of just coins, moving them around. If it's a concept you're working on, it just needs to be something in front of you. That being said, after it started evolving and I wanted to get more engagement with my game, and people weren't really interested in playing a game that I've scribbled over with Sharpie 15 times, and wanted something a little bit more, I went pretty low tech and just went in PowerPoint and dragged some images into PowerPoint of little stick figures and wrote some text under it, then just hit print and took a pair of scissors and cut those out. So I think there's a lot of progress you can make with really, really low tech and really low cost to entry here. It's really not until you're, and I'm going to say it again, 99% sure that you're done with your game, which will happen dozens of times, that you should really start worrying about sort of the aesthetic of it, in my mind. I think, at least in my approach, I know some games, they start with an aesthetic or even a brand or anything like that, a license deal, and they have to start with that and then create a mechanic around it. But in my approach, starting with just pen, paper, and PowerPoint, the 3 Ps: pen, paper, and PowerPoint.
It is different because everyone kind of does it in their own way, and it's probably just a good conversation you could have with designers, like, oh, well, what's worked for you, what hasn't. I think for me is just having a lot of scratch paper, and blanks and like multicolored Sharpies, and being okay with going to local convention. So check out a local convention, see if they're doing like a Pro Spiel, and if they're sponsored by like Game Crafter, Print and Play, etc. Like there are loose components there, blanks, junk, a whole bunch of like loose stuff, and you could just snag whatever you want. So that's also a quick little tip. And or some people might find it blasphemous, but just pull from your games. Just grab a couple meeples from one game and maybe some dice from another game, and at least you got some core components there, and then you could use scratch paper to just write it all up. In terms of investment, I do think it's good to have a printer and a paper cutter, like those ones you see when you're in elementary school.
Oh yeah,
those are good. And you could just use regular paper. Like you don't have to get into looking like cardstock and weights and GSM, all that kind of stuff. Like you don't even have to worry about that at the very beginning. So yeah, and then software tools, there's ways to automate cards online. It kind of depends if you're willing to do paid or if you're willing to do free. If you have Windows, there's some tools you can do there. But I know designers who they'll be like, I just use Excel for my cards, and it works for them. So I think it's just getting started, even if it's just a Sharpie and a piece of paper, and you kind of learn from there and talk to people.
When you're ready to upgrade, the only other tip I have is go to your local thrift store and buy the copy of Monopoly that's missing half of the cards. And that's some good board game material right there. And then really, and I've done this a decent number of times, is just get a glue stick and just glue your paper directly on top of their paper. And there you go, you got your game board right there. So if you're looking to move to a bit more of a durable one, I've got a lot of things built on Monopoly boards.
Yeah, I've got some similar stuff. I actually start slightly differently. I start with blank index cards because you can buy those at a office store super cheap. And that gives you, they're large, which means you have lots of room to scratch stuff out and write, new stuff on them. And I actually use educational supplies. for like small children. Like I bought off of the internet for just a couple of dollars this giant box that has all of these different colored cubes in it. I don't know what they use them for with teaching. I'm sure there's a billion uses, but for me, it's I have different colored cubes because games use different, resources and stuff. And now I've got this giant selection of colors and cubes, and I'll get different shapes and of stuff and do it that way. But yeah, same thing. You start cheap, you start easy, you write stuff down with, colored pens or Sharpies or whatever, and you make it work. And then once it works, then I start upgrading. I personally use something called NANDeck, which lets you automate a bunch of card making stuff. Because when you're making something that's, like a deck builder and you've got, hundreds of cards that need to get, printed out, you don't want to do all of that by hand. That gets really tedious. There's other tools for it. That's just the one that I found because it was free. But yeah, make life easier on yourself. Definitely. Don't break the bank trying to polish up a really published, or publish worthy, set of artwork and everything initially with your idea. Get it to that 99% first. Make sure that it's good and you're not going to be, scrapping half the stuff and starting over again in a couple of days.
To clarify, NANDeck, if I remember, is Windows only. I don't think it'll work on Mac.
It might be. I don't happen to know off the top of my head. But yeah, that was just where I started. It was one of those suggestions I found online and it was free. So I said, sure, and I will note that it is a little more techy. It's not particularly user-friendly. I just come from a programming background, so I don't have problems with it. But I would not necessarily suggest that if you're afraid of getting too deep in the computery side of things. It's not the easiest tool to use.
That kind of leads to an. Oh, go ahead, Ronald.
On the paid end of the spectrum, I use Component Studio, $10 a month, web-based application, which is maybe like an NANDeck. Like actually, you could do quite a bit of things. You could do cards, you could do hexes, you could do. It kind of comes out in a printable form on a regular 8.5 by 11, and you just slice away. And worth checking out by Game Crafter. Actually, it's by Game Crafter.
That makes sense. Yeah,
love it. So as we're coming up on time, I'd like to kind of wrap with what are you guys up to in the next, call it, couple months, maybe plans at the early 2024. If you guys just kind of want to share where you're at, game wise or personal wise, and as a player, a designer, a developer, I'll leave it up to you guys. Whatever you'd like to share.
I'll go. I am looking to take my game to the Origins convention next year. It's been on my list to do for a couple of years now, and the pandemic kind of derailed things, but we're back on track. So I'm actually planning later this week, I think is when tickets probably go on sale sometime soon. So I'm going to start actively tracking that, figuring out what I need to do, what hotels I need to do, who I need to start talking to. But yeah, that's sort of my personal deadline of have it ready to pitch to publishers at Origins in 2024.
Yeah, if we could connect on offline, because I participated at Origins last year for the speed pitching. So that
okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
Some tips for that. For me, assuming life doesn't get in the way, which is another conversation about, how do people juggle their real life and their kind of board game design life. But if I had more time, I would love to get a couple projects ready for PAX Unplugged, and so that's going to be in December of this year. That's also a really great convention to kind of like know where the scouts are. So the scouts are kind of publishers in the individuals within publishers in the industry who scout games, and so that's a good one to kind of go. Origins is also a good one. But it's really just continuing game design, continuing kind of engaging with the local community with playtesting. And yeah, I think this industry is very much kind of like a give and take as well. And so I advise anyone to kind of like, provide kind of their help where they can. So whether that's maybe volunteering at a kind of local convention, whether it's, organizing some meetups, whether it's even just going and just play testing games. It's I think the industry is very, very kind of receptive to a lot of kind of like that interaction.
For myself, I've got sort of two goals that I'm working on right now. Since I have wrapped up the playtesting of Demigods, I gave myself until the end of September to get in all the playtesting I needed to do. And by the end, it's playing well, and I'm freezing it where it's at. So we're done with the development of the game, and I'm shifting into community building and getting ready for the launch of it. So my two focuses are continuing to build the community of game designers in Southern California, connecting that with playtesters, but more specifically with people who are curious about designing their own games, coming in with just mechanics that they're interested in, talking through that, learning about the landscape of publishing, and actually prototyping their games. So if you're in the area and interested, feel free to join on in there. The other step is sort of switching my brain from playtesting brain over into marketing and community building and social media managing. So that's something that I don't have too much experience in. So I'm looking to connect with people that might be interested in partnering up to help out with that. It could be a great experience to go on together. We've got a game that works. So if there's someone interested in trying to help develop the community around it and get excitement and buzz going, definitely looking for that, because hoping, like I said, to kickstart it sort of late March, early April of next year. So I got a timeline of about 5-6 months to make it all happen. And I'm doing my research, I'm doing my work, and it looks like it's going to happen.
Beautiful. And with that, I'm going to go over to how you can get in touch with everybody. So see this. I'm Sean Yoshikawa, and the easiest way to follow me is on Instagram, my name. Ronald, would you like to present your social media links and what they're going to find on each of them?
I just had to unmute myself. Sure. I'm not so much on social media, but the social media I am on is YouTube, Facebook, and I have a link. And yeah, just look out for me and we could connect.
Beautiful. Trevor?
Yeah, so the publishing company that I started, it's called Archwood Games. So you can find our website at archwoodgames.com. You can follow me on Instagram at archwoodgames. And also the easiest way is just to email me directly, which is archwoodgames@gmail.com. You can also find that link on the website. Pretty much whichever link you follow, you're going to find me. So feel free to message me on Instagram or sign up for the Kickstarter information on the website, or reach out via email.
Perfect. And I believe David will have something coming up very soon. But if you want to reach him, what is there any way, David, that you'd like to get in touch?
Actually, right now I am on the Table for Two Discord, so you guys can reach me there. And yeah, I'm working on getting some stuff set up for social media stuff for it.
All righty. And this is the information for Table for Two Games. You follow us on follow the channel, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, join the Facebook group, follow us on Instagram, and that is the QR code for the Discord. And with that, I will say thank you guys so much for this. It was very fascinating, and at least for me, it was very, very fun to listen in. So appreciate your time, and I'm excited to do this again.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having us. We appreciated being on here, and excited to meet anyone who's interested in taking the journey too.
Absolutely.
Great. Appreciate the conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you. This has been good.